I'm Ken, and as I was saying earlier to one or two people, that I prepared this passage, and I included verses 16 and 17, which is the bit with Luther in it, and I was going to expound amazingly that the just shall live by faith, and go for it. And I suddenly realised that wasn't my verse. So this is different. This is funnily enough, you'll say to yourself, well, this is very similar to what you've had before. So there we go. Let's try it. It's verses 8 to 15. 8 to 15. Okay. Right. First, says Paul, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world. God, whom I serve with my whole heart in preaching the gospel of his Son, is my witness of how consistently I remember you in my prayers at all times. And I pray that now at last my God will let me go to Rome. I long to see you, that I may impart some spiritual gift to make you strong. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that I planned many times to come to you, but I've been prevented from doing so until now, in order that I may have a strong harvest among you, just as I had among other Gentiles. I am bound both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish. That's why I'm so eager to preach the gospel in Rome. Okay, so Paul here in verse 11, it's interesting. You can see he unwraps himself. He's a preacher who actually unwraps his heart, because he says, I long to see you, that I may impart some spiritual gift to make you strong. Now, we've been dealing with spiritual gifts, and I think he puts it correctly that spiritual gifts are so valuable. We talked about them because there's a level of God's provision for us, spiritual gifts that we can move into. And I've seen them being used in kind of 20, 30, 40 years ago in a depth and breadth that we haven't yet reached in Red Hill. So Paul's saying that I've got something, I want to share it with you, I want to encourage you, I want to bless you. So that was one thing he says. But now the second thing I want to kind of talk through is verse 14. And he says, well, I'm bound both to Greeks and non-Greeks. And what he's saying basically is everyone, the barbarians, he puts it in one of the early versions. He's talking about the good guys, the high class and the low class. And he's saying, yeah, actually, God comes to the poor as well. And I'm going to talk about that in a little while. Everyone, God tells us actually that everyone is in our power. And we kind of say, well, actually, I'm pretty good at talking to the intellectuals and the guys, but what about the stupid poor people? And he said, no, God's got things he can allow you to speak about. Paul sees the urgency of the matter of life and death. And Paul doesn't forget the fact he does talk about hell at times. Now, and I was alluding this Martin Lloyd-Jones, and he said, of course, these days we don't talk about hell because we'd love to talk about the positives, but we don't talk about hell. But we've got to recognize that actually, where do people go if they're not Christians? How utterly difficult it is to realize that some people that we know don't go to heaven. That's desperate. And Paul wants us Paul in the most influential city in the world says, I've got something to preach. I want to come to this place. And he did. He preached by being in prison. it says in Thessalonians, it's not Thessalonians, it's yeah, one of the Gospels, which is it, one of the letters. He says basically that actually, I'm so glad I'm in prison because I've had an influence on the house of Caesar here. Quite amazing. So anyway, I'll just go back a little way now. Who did God choose? I know that's just an interesting factor. He chose us, but it does say that, brothers, he says, think about what you were when you were called. Not many of you are wise by human standards, not many influential, not many noble, but God chose the foolish things of this world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things in this world to shame the strong. He chose the lowly things in this world to despise things that are not, to nullify the things that are. So no one can boast before him. And I think we want to just recognize that we're a bit in that position. We really aren't worthy, but God has given us the dynamic. He's given us, he says, look, actually, I can speak through you. And that, isn't that amazing? He wants to speak through us. He wants to speak to the world. As Paul puts it here, I'm bound to the Greeks and the Jews. I'm bound to everyone. And I just want to finish up with a case study. Now, there's an old guy that you know quite well. He's not a Christian, but he's seen you around. He's maybe a neighbour. It's a, you know, it's a silly situation, but and he's just heard that actually he's got a bad disease, and in a few weeks' time he will die. Now you know the scenario, and he feels that you're a Christian, and you've got something to offer him, and he comes to you and he says, "Look, I think you've got something that I don't know where I'm going. What is the possible answer?" And we've had this, I mean, we've had this so many times, haven't we? You may not have that actual position, but I'm just giving this case study. So what is your response? I know my response in so many of these situations is that I haven't got a clue. I don't know what to say. That moment of, goodness me, I haven't got a word to say. I'm unprepared. And I think the answer here is that when Paul said, he went to one of the places and he said, I preached to them, but I was kind of full of difficulties. But I realized that when I am weak, then am I strong. And I've so many times people have said to me, guys, will you pray for me? And I thought, oh, for goodness sake, I've got nothing. I haven't got anything to pray. And at that moment, God knows. He says, okay, I know what you're actually saying is you haven't got, and of course you haven't. It's me. And at that moment, I find that God gives me something. And you pray for someone and you think, oh, that sounded okay. And the God says, thank you so much. You've got just the right answer. You think, but I don't know what I said even hardly. But how did it happen? We got to realize that God takes us on board when we're willing to kind of say, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not in charge. So just out of interest, how do we respond to this guy? First of all, of course, you've got a testimony. And I think that is so good because you've got a testimony. You know what it is. You can share it. Secondly, I think this is pretty vital, and I think it's often missed out. What did Jesus say to the thief on the cross when the guy said, remember me when you go to heaven? He said, yes, today you will be with me in paradise. And I think that's such a dynamic verse that we can often miss. And the obvious verse is, let me just finish with this, that I mean, you've got it all stacked up. It's John 3:16, haven't you? For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. You've got Romans 3:23. all have sinned and failed. And you've got Romans 6:22, the wages of sin is death. And you've got the positive one, like the one in Romans 7:37 that I really love, that he says, if anyone is thirsty, come to me. Anyone who believes in me, there will be rivers of living water flowing from him. And I mean, you've got stacks of verses to choose from, but it's just the whole essence of where somebody asks the question, remember that actually God knows that when I'm weak, and he speaks to me, he speaks into my heart and gives me something. And I'm so amazed, because so frequently I feel inadequate, and 9 cases out of 10 he gives me something. Now I'd say the 10th case is where, if I'm not careful, I can say, okay, God, I know you're going to do it, and I'll just pretend I'm weak. But there's a real kind of sense of the reality that God speaks to me when I realize my inadequacy and his power through me. Okay, guys, that is it.